in December and January. It's impossible no more as the Thunder now lead 4-3 with 2:06 to go. Unbelievable moment.
Welcome back, fans, to the ECHL Insider. I'm your host, Garrett Hunter. No one thought it was possible, as you just saw, down over 10 points and in 6th place going into the second half of the year was the Adirondack Thunder, and they pulled off one of the most improbable comebacks to take the 4th spot from the Worcester Railers and clinch the playoffs. And boy, were those fans going crazy yesterday in Glens Falls as they clinched a big playoff spot and are in now the Kelly Cup playoffs against the Newfoundland Growlers. We will talk about that series as well as every other Kelly Cup playoff round 1 series later on in the show. Let's get you, though, to scores from the final week of the regular season, and then we will talk about the Kelly Cup playoffs. The Idaho Steelheads set the record last week for the most ever wins and the most ever points ever in a regular season of ECHL hockey. 58 wins the Steelheads had and 119 points. What a successful regular season it was. Brabham Cup winners for the Steelheads, and now they look to chase the more important Kelly Cup for the postseason champion in the ECHL. They also had a crazy 7-6 overtime victory over the Rapid City Rush last week to get that mark. The previous holder of the best regular season was the Ice Gators of Louisiana in 01-02. No longer an ECHL team is the Louisiana Ice Gators, but what a season they had back there before I was even born in 01-02. But the Steelheads topped that this season. Also, the Maine Mariners had a dramatic season conclusion game on Sunday afternoon at home against the Norfolk Admirals. Also a sad way for the Norfolk Admirals in their season. The Admirals scored a franchise-high 10-2 victory, beating the Admirals in the last game of the regular season, and now they roll on to the postseason, and we'll talk about their series later in the episode. So that concludes our scores from last week. Let's get to the Kelly Cup playoffs. We'll start in the North Division with the Adirondack Thunder and Newfoundland Growlers. Adirondack didn't even expect to be here, as we mentioned. What an improbable comeback it was, taking that 4th spot from the Worcester Railers. And arguably, they come in with the most momentum of every team right now, taking on the Growlers. What a hard team they are to play. But if they can keep the momentum going that they have had this entire second half of the season, I expect that they could pull up that upset on the Growlers. So my one upset of the series, I am going to predict that the Adirondack Thunder are going to pull up the upset like they upsetted the Worcester Railers in the second half of the season. I expect them to beat the Newfoundland Growlers in round 1 of the Kelly Cup playoffs, and that's going to be my pick. I'm going to pick every one of these series. That's my pick for round 1 of the North Division. Adirondack beats Newfoundland. That's my pick. Let's go to the second series in the North Division, the Maine Mariners and Reading Royals. The two teams met last year in the first round. Last year was number 1 seeded Reading, number 4 seeding Maine. Now it's 2 versus 3 this year. Also, the second time in franchise history the Maine Mariners are making the playoffs. This is a much more experienced Maine team than last year. Obviously, a higher seeded team. They have made a lot of improvement from this time last year when they clinched the playoffs. I expect them to play the Reading Royals a lot closer this year, but Reading has a lot of good offense. They've done a lot of good things this year. I expect them to pull off the nail biter against the Maine Mariners, so I'm picking Reading Royals for that second North Division series. Let's go to the South Division now, where the defending Kelly Cup champs Florida Everblades in the 4 seed will take on the 1 seed division champ South Carolina Stingrays. If you remember back 2 years ago, these teams met, except it was 4 seed South Carolina and 1 seed Florida. South Carolina in the elimination final game went to Estero and upset the Florida Everblades in a crazy game. Florida fans, you guys probably do not forget that, and this is your postseason revenge series on the Stingrays. Stingrays is the favorite for this series, obviously, in the 1 seed, but you can't count out the Florida Everblades, a team with tons of playoff experience, winning the Kelly Cup last year. Can't count them out, and I'm picking the South Carolina Stingrays to beat the Florida Everblades in this series, but don't expect it to be lopsided. I expect this to go all the way to Game 7. What a close series it'll be between Everblades and Stingrays. And our second series in the South Division, the top 2-seeded Jacksonville Icemen will take on the 3-seed Greenville Swamp Rabbits. And again, 2 teams that are so closely played. They played close games all throughout the regular season. I expect nothing different in the postseason, and I expect the Jacksonville Icemen to pull out a close series win over the Greenville Swamp Rabbits and get their second series win in franchise history. Let's move on to the Western Conference, the Central Division now, with the number 1 seed in the Central, Cincinnati Cyclones, and the number 4 seed, Fort Wayne Comets. 2 teams that battled pretty evenly in the regular season. Fort Wayne had that big comeback game against Cincinnati in the Heritage Bank Center several weeks ago. We talked about that a few episodes prior, and I really expect things like that to help the Fort Wayne Comets in this series. Obviously, games 4 out of 7 of these games will be in the Heritage Bank Center. That's a big home ice advantage for the Cincinnati Cyclones, but expect the Fort Wayne Comets to build on the success that they've had earlier in the season in the Heritage Bank Center. I think they're going to take some of that momentum, take some of also their home ice fans with them to the Heritage Bank Center. Expect this to be a very close series again, but I expect the Cincinnati Cyclones to come out on top. I'm picking them for this series. And our second Central Division series, the Toledo Walleye, played in the Kelly Cup Finals last year and 2-seed this year, and 3-seed Indy Fuel. Fuel are making just their second postseason appearance in franchise history. Toledo, this is like your 200th appearance in franchise history. A very experienced postseason playoff team in the Toledo Walleye. When I come into this series and I think about the 2 teams and 2 seasons they played, very different, and they ended up in almost the same spot. Toledo played very well towards the conclusion of the season and started a little slow in the beginning, and they were really expecting to get that 1 seed. I feel like Toledo was really discouraged not getting that top seed, the Cincinnati Cyclones jumping them towards the last few games and clinching that first spot. Kind of discouraged the Toledo Walleyes. So based on that, see how they come into this series. Are they going to come in angry and just ready to play against the Indy Fuel? Are they still going to be discouraged rolling into this series, regretting not getting that top seed? That'll be very interesting. And then on the other side, you got the Indy Fuel, a very determined, offensive-minded hockey team coming in, and they're just ready to play. They kind of remind me, actually, of the Cincinnati Cyclones last year in that 4 seed last year, Indy in the 3 seed this year, who just played the Toledo Walleye last year in the first round, and they came in and just gave the Walleye all they could handle, going to a Game 7, actually, last year against the Walleye. I expect the Fuel Walleye series to be exactly like that. I expect a Game 7. I expect an all-out bout between these 2 teams, and I expect the Toledo Walleye to pull it off by the hair of their chinny chin chin, very close against the Indy Fuel, but I got the Toledo Walleye winning by an inch. And our final division playoffs to go to the Mountain Division, also the home to the best regular season ever Idaho Steelheads, which we talked about earlier. Steelheads in the 1 spot will play the Utah Grizzlies in the 4 spot. Before we can talk about this series, though, we got to talk about how the Grizzlies got here. Boy, did they have a grind to get here. They swept the Tulsa Oilers in the last week of the playoffs, a 3-game sweep to clinch this spot. But they were so close to not even making the playoffs. Wichita Thunder last week played a shootout game in their final game against the Allen Americans and lost in a shootout 4-3 in Allen. What a heartbreaker it was for those Wichita fans. We'll talk about you guys in the post-season after playoffs, but what a heartbreaker game that was for Wichita. They expected to be in the playoffs. Earlier in the season, they were on a roll in 2nd place in the Mountain Division and just had a slow slide all the way to being eliminated in their last regular season game. But you got to give kudos to the Utah Grizzlies. They kept fighting. They were out of playoff position for a large majority of the regular season, and they came back with a sweep of the Oilers in the last week and clinched this spot. So back to this playoff series, Grizzlies and Steelheads. It's going to be a good series. It'll be very interesting to see how the Steelheads come out, though, in this series. They have not played a very meaningful game in several months because they have clinched the playoffs several months prior to this game. So now another meaningful game for the Steelheads. See how they present themselves. Are they going to see it as a new challenge and roll right into it? Or are they just going to come sleepwalking in like they had a sleepwalk roll really through the Mountain Division the entire regular season? So we'll see how the Steelheads play this. They definitely have the skill and capability to sweep the Grizzlies in 4 games. But we'll see how they come out and see how the determined Utah Grizzlies come out in this series. But I'm picking the Idaho Steelheads to beat the Grizzlies in round 1. Let's go to our final series of round 1. The 3 seed in Mountain Division, Kansas City Mavericks. 2 seed, Allen Americans. Kansas City and Allen had great games throughout the whole regular season. I expect this to be no different. But Allen definitely has postseason experience. They won back-to-back cups in their first years in the ECHL just a few years ago. So they definitely have that experience. They definitely have scoring experience with Hank Crone. He won the scoring title in the entire league this year. Guys like him and his teammates are really good at scoring goals. We've seen that all season long. I expect those guys to be the difference and beat the Kansas City Mavericks in round 1 of the playoffs and go to that Mountain Division title game for the Allen Americans. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Playoffs Round 1. We'll see you next week. Check up on these rounds, these series, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. We'll see you next week and enjoy the playoff hockey.
Gonna leave. He's coming back on. Oh, if he comes back on the ice, it could be major. He's good to see he stayed there. All right, here's what happened.
Yep, here's the replay. This is where things really started to get going. Laviolette puts a shove on Denemy there, gets another one, and then Leonard comes over. Everybody wanted to get at Leonard. So this, and then Leonard was about to get off the bench, throws his gloves. I mean, this is...